Good evening from Lyon. As you've heard, my name is Eric Britton, and I am a longtime friend and colleague of Mr. Schimmelpennink, whom I have known since the early 70s. I want to, based on our working experience together, summarize quickly 10 things about Lud that you may not know. I do not intend this to be personal, but I think that in order to understand what he's up to, you have to have a feeling for this unusual personality. You have to kind of start from the beginning, and that in this particular case might be the immediate post-war period, starting in 1945, and in which the young Lud Schimmelpennink, who had gone through the difficult days of the Depression preceding the war, the uncertainty, and then the war itself, found himself in a situation in which he has 11 brothers and sisters. And when they sit down at the table together, there's not a great deal on it. These were hard times in the Netherlands, but the educational system worked, and by and large, people were optimistic about the future. They were going to make their own future. It was not going to be handed to them. Then, starting in around 1960, Europe was fully on the path of recovery and more prosperous than it had ever been. And many Europeans found themselves in a new equilibrium situation in which there was plenty of food on the table and television in the living room and either a car or the dream of a car. This was entirely a different time, and it brings us to the reaction of young people to this, what they viewed as complacency in the older generations, and leading the pack in the Netherlands, as I read history, were the provosts, who were trying to look at what was actually going on. There were similar groups in other parts of Europe, but by and large, policymakers, the media, and the public were so enamored of this new world that they were not adding up what were the costs of all of this prosperity, what were the costs of all of these cars in their city in terms of life quality. So then a group of the provosts, including Lud, got together and they started to organize their thinking. The first part of that was the White Bicycle Project in 1965, and it's a project which is greatly exaggerated in many of the accounts of it, but it was just a matter of getting together and painting a couple of bicycles and leaving them around for anyone to pick up. And as you know, and as you will hear, that did not succeed, and so Lud decided that he would come up with a program for public bicycles, shared bicycles in Amsterdam, and ran for office and proposed 10,000 bikes. I mean, this had never happened. First of all, there were no public bikes other than the original public bike project yet. And to get to a project proposed for 10,000 people, you have to wait for a full generation in 1907 in Paris, in which they proposed 10,000 originally. This was not approved by the city council, and so Lud said, well, if we can't do it with bikes, what about small, slow electric cars? And hence the Bitcar project, of which you're going to hear a lot about. But that too, after a couple of years, failed to get government approval, and so it failed. So it seems that everything is failing. You know, Amsterdam and the idea of a white bicycle or a white car, a failure didn't work. But out in the world, the reaction was, it took a while, but the reaction was that these two ideas, that of sharing bicycles, public bicycles, and sharing cars, have taken over in the world to the point in which today there are more than 1,000 cities around the world, and we know exactly who they are, who in 69 different countries, who are using something like 2.6 million bicycles and growing very, very fast. So what was Amsterdam's failure was the world's success. Likewise, in terms of car sharing. The Vidcar was the first technology-based car sharing project in the world. And today there are a couple of thousand of them all over the world and growing very fast. So why did one city who was confronted with these ideas, why didn't it work? Why didn't it get picked up immediately? Which is kind of the problem we face today. Now, Lud is now building on the success of these concepts, and he's come up with a new project called the White City Mobility Agenda, which we will be hearing something about in the future. Now, what makes the White City project different from all of the rest? Well, its point of departure, there are two really, there are more, but one of them is that it takes its point of departure in terms of climate. In other words, the goal of the White City project is to redefine the mobility system so that it has zero carbon, the mobility system. This is, of course, very ambitious. And the second highlight of this approach is an understanding that it's simply not possible to fit cars for everybody into any livable city. And so we need something which is much more space efficient. And for it to be space efficient, we have to separate the 20th century concept of ownership from the 21st century concept of use. And so there we have it. These, I believe, are enormous accomplishments. And I think that they're sufficiently important that we should be considering working hard to see if we can get Lud and his work nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. So that's where I stand on this today. Just one last word on failure from an Irish playwright. He wrote this about failure. He said, "Ever tried, ever failed. No matter. Try again, fail better." That's what we can hope for. Thank you so much for inviting me.